Podcast for podcasters by podcasters. Podcasting Smarter is the official podcast from Podbean, featuring podcasting interviews, best practices, and helpful tips. We're here to give you the tools, resources, product updates, and news to help you get started podcasting and keep your podcast growing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so excited that you're here with us today. We are joined today by Phil Buckley, who is an incredible change management strategist, amongst other things. My name is Norma Jean Belenke. I'm the head of events here at Podbean, and we have an incredible event for you here today. Hi, Phil. How you going?
I'm doing great, Norma Jean. How are you doing today?
Good. We're so excited to speak with you here today. And before I read our brief intro, we're doing this series as part of our corporate Podcasting Smarter series because the way that internal podcasting is being used for enterprise level organizations, for Fortune 500 companies, for Fortune 100 companies, we are seeing the incredible use case of podcasting and how internal podcasting is being used for professional development, for internal communications. And so we want to really offer value and tools to everyone out there within our podcasting community, within our enterprise podcasting community. And we're so excited that you're here with us today. So thank you so much. I'm going to read our brief intro and then we'll hand it off to you for our incredible event today, Change on the Run. So welcome back, everyone, to Podcasting Smarter and our Corporate Podcasting Smarter series, Change on the Run, Surviving Workplace Uncertainty, with Phil Buckley, Change Management Strategist, Leadership Coach, and author of the books, Change on the Run and Change with Confidence. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Corporate Podcasting Smarter has live stream sessions like this one, along with exclusive recorded episodes on the Podcasting Smarter podcast. Corporate Podcasting Smarter is brought to you by Podbean. We're a private podcast hosting solution for Fortune 100 companies with secure encrypted podcasting and a proven track record within the industry. Head over to podbean.com/enterprise to learn more about our business and enterprise solutions. And the link is also here in the description of our event today. Thank you so much. And now we'll get started. Thanks so much for joining us, Phil.
Thanks, Norma Jean. And hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. And as you mentioned, there's so much going on in everyone's world now, post-pandemic. And what I find is that the change, whether it's your corporation, a not-for-profit, even a government organization right now, the context is a little different, but the challenges are really big and they're pretty much the same. And I think one thing that's true from whatever organization that you're in is that constant change is a reality for all individuals, yourselves, your teams, and for your organizations. And if you think way back, it used to be that change was an event. You do one particular change, take a break, and then go to the next one. But that's no longer true. And what I'm finding is it's not only that there's so much change going on, but the pace of change is hyper-intensive too. So you're expected to do multiple changes at one time. You've still got your day job. You've got your personal goals for the year, and you're trying to manage through this. And there's just not enough capacity to manage everything as the way you would like to do it and to get through and not only survive change, but to also be successful in it. So everyone is sort of trying to manage change on the run. And what I'd like to do today is to give you a mindset and a perspective for sometimes when you're faced with change challenges or even tasks of change, that you can do something quickly and in a focused way that will get you through so that you can manage your next change challenges. But before I talk about doing that, let's talk more about the environment that we're faced with right now. And when I talk to people, and I've asked them right through the pandemic years, through now, and talked about, well, could you tell me about how change in your environment? Could you describe it? What are the impacts for you? And it's really interesting, even though it's all around the world, different types of business, the same things come up. And what they say is one constant change that I mentioned, like it's just one thing after the next. And it changes too. It's not even like, here's the changes for the years, let's just knock them down. the changes are changing even midstream. Fast paced, again, you don't have time to go away for a week and think about things. You have to react really, really quickly. Multiple changes at once, which I think is the biggest part of complexity. You're not just doing one thing, but you're doing multiple things and your day job. No easy answers. The playbooks of the past. Hey, I did this 5 years ago and it will work for me now. Not in this case. Things are changed. People have changed. The type of change has changed. So it's complex. Not enough time to do your work. And we hear so much about burnout and people are exhausted. Everybody's busy. Change fatigue. And what change fatigue means is that you keep getting hit with all these changes that you can almost become apathetic or indifferent. There's no, hey, this is an emergency anymore, because you're just ground down. And essentially there's nothing left in your tank. You've just been ground down and you kind of lose your resources to manage these things. And a big one, what I'm finding now is that there's little time to learn because everyone's doing everything and there's just no time to take a break. So I'm wondering, when you look at all of these things that are happening, are a lot of these or some of these what you're experiencing right now? And in that regard, how do you manage through this so you keep going and that you're resilient? And I think there's two big impacts of this type of environment of workplace change. The first one is that most people are consumed. Some people are overwhelmed by the amount of change that they have to do. And the challenge is that typically when you learn a new skill, you go on training and you get proficient in it, and then you've mastered the skill. But people are so tied to their deadlines and things that they have to get in, there's just not enough time to learn. And Josh Burson, who's a global HR talent consultant, he's estimated that we spend about 25 minutes a week on just learning, and everything else is just transactional and making it happen. So kind of the deck is stacked against us to be proficient in change. And my biggest learning in these times is change isn't about being perfect. It's about being expedient and effective, but there is no more 100% perfect anymore. And in people who try to do it, they just get burnt out. And then the second impact of this whole environment is that the complexity of the changes that are happening. Look at supply chain and the challenges that we've recently had. There's no easy solutions. And what I'm finding people are frustrated with, and it's actually affecting their performance, is that their experiences of the past, or even their functional expertise, doesn't overlay to these new circumstances. So really, they just don't have something to guide them on their behavior or their thinking process, because it's all new. So when you put these all together, I think what happens is people are in survival mode. They're trying different things to see if it will work, and perhaps being caught in certain changes with new ones coming on. And it just seems to be quite a bit to work through constantly. So what I would suggest in managing these types of situations, instead of trying a bunch of things and hoping that they would stick, is to really get focused and do one thing really well. So my suggestion is, when you're caught in change like this, the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto Principle, which suggests do one thing and you'll get most of the benefits in the least amount of time, is the way to go after this. That old, like, hey, let's do the 5 steps of planning and let's just get a committee going. What I'm finding is sometimes that's appropriate for really big decisions. But as you're personally managing through change, there's just not enough time, and it's easy to become backlogged with all the things you need to do. So if you take a 80-20 mindset and you're constantly saying, what's the one thing I can do that will give me the best results, 80% of the results in 20% of the time, so I can free myself up and move forward to the next challenge, I find that people are far more resilient that way. And they actually develop a skill of getting really good at focusing on one thing. And there's 4 benefits of this approach that I found when people are actually trying it and managing through change. One is a forced prioritization. And what that means is, if you can only do one thing, well, what is it going to be? And I'm not going to try and do a bunch of things and get busy and think I'm really active and busy and effective. I'm going to focus on one thing. So I'm prioritizing. And if I have a team, I'm prioritizing for my team too. The next one is focusing your resources. And I've never met anyone in the last 30 years that says, I've got more resources than I know what to do about. What do I do with them? And I think what it means is that if you only have few resources, and maybe you only have your own resources, do one thing and do it well is the best strategy almost every single time. The third one, and I think this is great because I'm seeing a lot of people who are freezing. They're almost caught with, I think they call it the amygdala hijacker, that fight, flight, or freeze when they're caught and they don't know what to do and they freeze. And what I find is if you get into action and do one thing quickly, you're doing it quickly. And I think the approach of saying, well, I'll just not act on it and I'll just let it go and just see what happens. In this hyper change environment, it only gets worse. You have to act quickly and things just don't go away. You've got to move on it. But the biggest one I find for our wellness and our sense of strength and confidence is by going into action quite quickly on one thing, it kind of calms you down. You get out of that fight, flight, or freeze, and you start focusing on doing that one thing that you chose. And when you do that, it actually builds your confidence. So think of a circumstance where something's gone wrong at work, and then you say, hey, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to do it quickly. You start getting followers because you know what to do. You build your confidence because people are looking at you as a leader. And you can move forward and get around those emotions that can get you into trouble. So if that's the 80-20 rule, how might it play out really practically for you? And I've got a couple of examples that I can show you for some big change challenges about how you can make it work for you. But first of all, I think there's one thing that I found that's been really helpful for change management for me. And what it is when you're looking at building change capability, there's three areas of capability. The first one is managing me. So how am I managing myself through this? How am I working through my emotions? What am I doing that is actually pushing it forward in the organization better? And so how do I act? The second one is sort of the nuts and bolts of managing change. So I understand the steps. I know the different processes I have to go through to go from where I am now to adopting the new change. So it's the project management, it's the stakeholder management, all those things you've got to do. And then the third one is managing people, managing others to get them through. So that managerial leadership role. And if you look at those three, and I'd invite you to think about someone that you know in your work to say, let me test it. And invariably, I find that leaders or individuals are great at one or two of them, but they're really good at all three. So what's, assessing people and saying, okay, how can I help? And seeing that where they're strong and really accentuating that, and then where they're not as strong and hopefully helping them out in that area. And then you can even think of yourself and say, well, what am I good at? And what am I things that I could build on? And for me, managing me is one I still work on. I take things personally. I get too emotionally involved, but at least I know it and I'm trying to build it forward. So let's go back to the 80-20 principle, change on the run, 80% of the results and 20% of the time. And I'm going to give you two examples. And this is in the case of one is managing me. What do you do when you're faced with something you've never faced with before? You just have no reference point. And how do you get around that? I just don't know what to do. And then the second one I'll take you is in the managing others. And then how do you address resistance? So every change has some form of resistance, but what do you do about it to manage it and move past it? So let's first of all take a look at managing the unknown. So managing the unknown, and what I'm finding now is since almost the playbooks of the past don't really apply or they're not as effective as they have been in the past. And then therefore it kind of leaves you on your own and a bit in the dark of, I've never experienced this. What do I do? How do I approach it? How do I get started? And even things like AI, there's just so many new components now. How do you work your way through? So what I've found is that in managing the unknown, again, how do you get started to make it happen? And my recommendation for you is the 80-20 rule is to really start looking at the facts. What information can you get? What information don't you know that you can start piecing together almost a framework that you can start figuring it out, things that you can actually start making hypotheses against so that you can start kind of molding the clay to start making steps forward and then to get it to action and then working your way through it. And there's 3 steps that I'd recommend when doing it. The first one is, what do I already know? And that's a source of confidence. Okay, I've never seen this, but what do I know? The second one is, well, what do I don't know? And then start making a list there. And all of a sudden, you've got a bit of a framework to work with. And then, well, what sources of information can I get to fill in the blanks of the stuff that I don't know? So it's 3 simple steps, and it takes you from, I don't have a clue, to, hey, I'm starting to build an action plan here, and I'm moving forward. And it sort of moves you from inertia and worrying into kind of motion and progress. So I've got an example for you and a tool, and this is an easy tool to use. And what happens when you just don't know? Well, this is what I call the discovery planning tool, and it really helps you understand any particular situation. And I find the best tools working through change, or probably through anything else, is they're really simple and they're in a chart format. So what I'm showing you on a screen here is it's a very simple 3 major columns. What do I know? What don't I know? And then what information do I need to fill in those blanks? And I've divided that information source into 2 subcolumns: media, which would be anything that you can get from newspapers to the internet to whatever, and expertise. And what expertise is, who do I know in my network? Who do I know who knows someone in my network who has some sort of experience about this? And this is what I find is all you need to create an action plan, to start filling in the blanks, to figuring out how you move forward. And I've got an example for you just to show you kind of how this works. And I think the pandemic conditions that we've all gone through, even though they might be a bit different around the world or your particular circumstances, generally, they were pretty much the same right at the beginning, way back in March of 2020, when nobody knew anything. And, watching on YouTube, nurses kind of washing their everything that they bought at a grocery store and just no masks and nobody knowing what was going on. So let's go through the template to see how it could work. And what I find is with the organizations I've worked with around the world, the ones that did the best at the beginning of the pandemic conditions is they got right into it and they started planning. And the ones that actually sat back were on a back foot and they didn't do as well. So what do I know? And what I'm going to do is take you through 3 things just to give you an idea of how this works. So the first one is, what do I know? Well, I know our existing policies, whether you're in manufacturing or not, safety protocols. I know the IT policies that we have when people were going back home to work sort of remotely. That's what I know. But at the time, what we didn't know were the government health protocols. They're trying to figure them out. And we just had to figure out how that we were going to get that done. So what is the government telling us so that we can incorporate it into our business and our family safety? Information sources, media, you had the government sites, you had the broadcasting sites, it was all over. Expertise, who was the biggest organization, as well as your government medical officers. And I think for most countries, the medical officers became mini celebrities because they were the main guides to help you fill in the blanks. What else do you know? Employee initial concerns. I don't have internet. How am I going to get, how am I going to, take all my files back home? But what you didn't know were the deeper circumstances of people managing their own lives. Did they have kids that they were going to have to sort of oversee as they're going to school remotely? Did they have elderly parents? So how do you find that out? Well, most organizations did surveys. They went right to the employees and said, tell me your circumstances. And then the last one is, hey, what don't I know? What are organizations doing out there where I can learn from? And again, there were case studies coming out. There was research being done and your network. So something like pandemic conditions and responses, which is massive. Here's just one example. But you could use this for everything that happens. A government regulation changes, your competitor does something that you've never heard of before. Use this simple template with these simple headings, and you start moving from, I've never seen this before, to, hey, I'm starting an action plan that I can share with my team, and we're moving forward. We're making hypotheses, we're making assumptions and checking them, and we're coming up with potential solutions. So that's the first example. My favorite example of all time, though, of how you use the 80-20 approach is when you're addressing resistance, when you want to change something in your organization. And again, resistance is normal. We're all human, but how do you address it in an 80-20 way? Well, the first thing is, let's talk a little bit more about what resistance is. When I mentioned that it's human, everybody has resisted something in their lives, so it should be expected. And when you think about it, when you do workplace change, you're asking people to give up comfortable routines or mindsets. You're in your comfort zone. You've been doing it forever, maybe even had success, and you got promoted through the current ways of working. And now you're saying things have changed. We really have to do things differently. I want you to think differently. I want you to do things differently. Just do it. And I think a lot of people, and some people in particular, struggle with it, and they don't want to let go of the past. So in that regard, if you're expecting it, how do you go about managing it? And one last thing I'll say too is, I think, resistance has a bad rap, where if it's resistance, it's something wrong. But my experience, sometimes the resistance is that people really care about your business, and they know more than you do. I remember that I was in one assignment where an organization put in a whole distribution software system, and I was called in because nobody was using it, essentially. Millions of dollars invested in it, and they just weren't using it. So the head of operations and IT said, Phil, you've got to go in, interview people. My suspicion is that they're not doing it because they just don't like it, and they're not getting on board. And what I found out, though, was they weren't using it because it didn't work. And their old Excel spreadsheets gave them a higher percentage accuracy of their distribution than what this new system was. And even worse is that the design team had asked them for feedback from the field, and it had been completely ignored. So sometimes resistance is good if it's good for the business. So how do you deal with resistance? How do you address it when it comes up? And what I would say is it's a little bit different depending on the type of resistance that you're getting, the root cause that's actually, why are people doing it? And the best work I've seen on why do people resist things that might be good for the business, but they just struggle with it personally. And a gentleman named Dr. David Rock came up with 5 key things why he said, from a neuroscience-based way on how our brains actually work, why people resist change and moving forward. And I added one on from my own personal experience. So let's go through them pretty quickly. First of all, loss of status. And that would be the new ways of working is that I personally feel that I'm kind of downgraded in my status. It could be, hey, Phil, you were reporting to the president, and in their new structure, you're reporting to a VP who reports into the president. So now I'm not reporting to him or her who's actually running the business. Or we're changing your title, or reducing your scope. Anything where you feel like there's a reducive status, it's only natural that people might be a bit resistant. The next one is loss of certainty. If you've ever been in a change where the communication hasn't been that great, so people are told that there's going to be changes, but they really don't know what that means for them. Or there was one merger where they said, okay, we're merging, but we're not going to do anything for 6 months. You can only imagine the lack of certainty of what's going to happen and the rumors that would fly. The next one is loss of autonomy. And that's really where, hey, I knew how to call the shots in the old world. I knew which lever to push. I had sort of an agency of what I would need to do. I knew the tools, and I feel really good about it. So anything that comes up, I have a plan on how to deal with it. In very new circumstances, you don't. And perhaps even you're reporting more so than you would in the past because you're going through a big transition. You've lost that autonomy of just doing things that you think are right. Another one that's a little bit closer to the personal sense is a loss or a lack of relationships. And this is when, hey, I have my best friend, I've been working with her for 5 years, and now in this new structure, I'm not going to be able to really talk to them for business. And we have a great way of working. Or, hey, my boss is in my same geography, and now I'm going to report someone into a different zone or a different region, and I don't even know who they are. So the next one, and there's only 2 more left, is the degree of fairness. And that's really where you think, hey, this isn't fair. I don't think this is right for the business, and it's just wrong. I wouldn't do that if I was leading the organization. It's just not fair. And one organization I worked with, they had 2 countries that were aligning their IT systems into a new system. But what it meant is one group was losing some functionality, and they just couldn't get over it wasn't fair. How can you take good things away from me for the common good? But the last one, and I think this is the one I see the most, is a perceived skills gap. When you look at what you know about the future, you're kind of worried that you're not going to be able to cut it. I don't have that capability. Hey, we're moving to this new system. Or, hey, it's going to be really important that we have these certain skills. Or we're going to be an agile organization. You look at it, you look at your skills, and you start doubting whether you're going to be able to be successful or as successful in the new world than you were in the past. And I think that's the big one that really gets, it's that insecurity. But when you look at all of these, I think the undertone or the undercurrent is that they're all based on fear. And it's fear of different things, but usually resistance comes up when people are afraid of something. And if you understand what they're afraid of, then you're better able to address it. And maybe they're afraid of something that just isn't going to happen. It's only a rumor and you can manage it. Maybe the fear is true and you can talk about the support that you can provide them. So the 80-20 approach of doing this is really, as soon as you see or hear any resistance, go right to the source and address it head on. And I've seen so many organizations and so many leaders, they hear rumblings that the resistance isn't, someone's saying things that they don't support it, or people aren't doing what they should be on the project plan, and they do nothing. And they assume, well, it'll just go away. Everyone's busy. But again, with change, things don't go away. So you've got to be expedient and fast and address it, or it only gets worse, especially if people don't take on the change and nothing happens. It almost gives permission for other people to do it as well. So the 3 things I do in addressing a resistance head on is, number 1, as I go right to the source and I ask them, what's going on? What's your concerns? What's the issue here? Because I want to know. Because 1, they might be right and I just didn't do anything. We've missed something that we should have planned on. Or I want to get the source of it. Are you worried because your title's changing? Do you think it's unfair? Is it the fact that your whole team that you built for 10 years is going to be going off into different other sections? I got to know. And when I know, or when I think I know, I do the second point and I ask them, I paraphrase it back and say, is this your number 1 concern? And maybe it's not, and I'll be corrected. Or if it is, then the third part, and this is where it takes managerial courage, is to address it again head on. And maybe it's just not true at all. And therefore you can say, no, we're not going to close the office or the plant. We have no condition. We have no plans to do that. Or maybe it is true. And hopefully you would have communicated it earlier. And then you can say, this is why we did it. We looked at these other alternatives, and this is how we're going to support you through the transition. And then people can deal with the truth. And I feel that people can't deal with dishonesty. Usually they have a hard time with surprises, but they definitely can deal with the truth and make the choices that they need to do. So let's put this into action, and let's give you one more tool to help you frame what happens when people start resisting the change that you need to implement. And again, it's a chart format, and there's 3 different columns. One is indications of the resistance. So what am I seeing? What am I feeling? Or what am I sensing that tells me something's going off? They're not buying it. They're not doing what they should. They're doing things that are going against it. They're becoming a barrier. what's the root cause? What's that source of fear that potentially it could be? And then what's my response going to do? And probably the biggest tip I could give you is resistance, is you do this before the resistance happens. So as you're planning to do the change, map it out. Because I find when leaders are faced with resistance, they get emotional, they say things that they might wish that they hadn't said, the tone, the culture is damaged. But if you pre-plan it, almost like a pre-mortem, what could go wrong? Why would they be doing that? And what could I do about it? When you see resistance, you go to the chart and you say, okay, what am I seeing? And what's my best response? Is that still true? And implementing it without the emotion. So let me give you an example and I'll take you through doing this. And again, systems implementations, I think are rife with resistance for so many reasons, but it's all new and it takes new skills and it sometimes takes away things that you love. So in that chart format, the first column, and I'll give you 3 different examples in what I would think an escalation of low resistance to high resistance. And the low resistance would be people are making negative comments. Maybe you've heard on a Zoom call or maybe it's a Teams call that people are kind of grousing about the change. I don't think this is a good idea. It'll fail like all the other ones. Whatever it is, people are starting to show resistance through what they say. The root causes, which would be the second column, what I find typically when people start bad-mouthing something, it's a loss of autonomy. They think they're losing something out, or it's the degree of fairness. And they just start gossiping about this is wrong. I don't agree. I think that Joanne should have had the top job instead of Raj. This fairness going on, and they just start talking about it. So what's the response that I would recommend? When I see something like that, first of all, I want to make sure, well, what's going on? Maybe they are talking about something that's wrong and they're the expert and we've got to know about it. But if it's just hey, I don't think this is great, I restate the case for change. I re-talk about why this is the best example. Here's what we looked at. This is what we're going to do. And then I talk about the support that we'll get to take them from where they are now to where they're going in the future, which might have a little bit of an impact that they'll be supported, but I'll address it head on. So that's number one, but I don't go to people's bosses. I just address with it right there and make it work. Okay, let's go a little bit higher though. Now people aren't attending planning sessions. They're not going to training. They have knowledge transfer meetings and they don't show up. Now this is a bit of insubordination. They're actively doing things that are blocking the success of the change. Now, when I see this happening, it's big on skills gap. I don't like the future. I'm maybe a little bit nervous that I don't know how I'm going to do well or how I'm going to be supported. So my response would be at higher level as well. First of all, I'd go in and talk about, hey, this is what's happening. You didn't show up. Maybe the person was sick and nobody knew. So, okay, that's okay. But they just chose, hey, I'm too busy. I love that one. Hey, I'm too busy. I can't do this training. Then I start talking about the impact that they have by not attending. Now we're going to have to retrain you. It's going to cost us time. It could be an additional money as well. You're jeopardizing the project. And I say that. And also I'd escalate it to leaders because I can't have this person keep doing this and pulling us back and giving almost permission for others who'd like to do it that might not be doing it. And it only gets worse. So I'll bring it up with the leaders and manage the leader to manage the situation. And then the last one just quickly is people, we've launched the change, whatever it is, but people are not following the new ways of working. They're not having the right mindset. They're not following the routines and processes. Their behaviors are off. Maybe they're actually still doing it merely their old way. And now we've got 2 systems going. They're just not doing it, hoping it will go away. And what I find is what's behind there is the loss of status, definitely certainty or autonomy. They're just not happy and they're not going to go and they're hugging onto the tree and you'll have to pull them away. In this case, this is really, really severe because, again, you're giving sort of tacit permission for others not to take on the change. And it doesn't take much to get chaos where half the team is following it, half the team isn't. you're not getting the benefits and you're actually destroying value. In that case, first of all, I gather data so I can prove it, escalate it immediate to leaders, and then I really push consequences, because if there's no consequence for not following new ways of working, there's no incentive to people to do it, even if they don't want to. And in this case, if there's no consequences, I find the change fails. So stepping back, when you look at this simple tool, 3 columns, plan out what could go wrong for resistance, why you think it might happen, and the response that you take. And then when it does happen, your 80-20 rule is go right there and find out what's going on and follow your plan, and you'll be really successful. So I wanted to sort of give you more than the 2 examples, just to say you can do this from almost anything within your change and the challenges and the tasks that you have. I just want to name out a few others under managing me, managing the work, and managing others. Under managing me, optimizing your time. What's the one thing I should be doing? How do I address an emergency? What happens quite a bit. Or overcoming a blocker, someone who's just not going to play with you and play ball and follow it. How do you get them on side? There's one thing you could do that will give you 80% of the results in 20% of the time. Managing the work, communicating effectively. Again, I think that's the number. If you can't communicate change well, it leads to resistance. Measuring success. What's the one thing you do to show that it's been successful or not? And then the third one is building cross-functional or cross-team alliances, because change now in our digital world, it impacts everyone. It's not just a small team. And then just finally, managing others. How do you earn trust? What's the one thing you can do to get people to feel that you're worthy of their trust? Telling people what to expect. How do you prepare them for what's going to happen? And then how do you change your culture? What's the one thing you could do to positively change your culture and make room for the new ways of working? And I have a podcast where I had 60 different leaders and come on that would say, this is my one thing, my 80-20 for a different topic. So there were 60 of them. And Norm Jean talked about how important podcasting is as a learning tool. It's so amazing to get leaders' perspectives, but there's always the one thing that you can do that will get you further ahead. So I wanted to leave you with one more thing, one more tool that you could have. And if you could say, well, Phil, how do you create the 80-20 that you'll do it? What happens? How do you do it in the moment? How do you, say, I don't know what to do. I want to come up with my one thing that will give me 80% of the results and 20% of the time. And here's, again, one more simple chart for you. And it has 3 columns. The one is the one action. What are my options? What is the one thing I could do? But what are 2 or 3 of them? The second column is why. Well, why is this the best one? And the third one is, well, what are those 3 steps that I would take to put it into action? And if you think back for the 2 examples, the managing the unknown and for how would I address resistance, it was the one thing and the 3 steps to activate it. And what I found, and I use this all the time, even for things I'd never even thought of was change. And I find once you get to 2 or 3 options and the whys and the steps, it becomes really clear which one you could do. And I would say it's within 15 minutes, you know which way to do it. Avoiding just that gut emotional and off you go. And I think if you do this and the benefits of this approach, when you decide it's right for you, is it just gets you moving. It helps you avoid the emotional stress of, I just don't know what to do. I've got too much to do. I don't have capacity. I don't have time to think. Default to one thing, and it gives you an action plan to get busy. And then once you start putting this into motion and you can bring your team into it, all of a sudden you're moving forward and your confidence is built. You're testing things out. You're testing and learning, and you're working your way through it. And one of the biggest benefits, I think, is then you can do it quickly, and then it makes room in your schedule for the next thing that you have to overcome. So that would be my suggestion. Change on the run. Do one thing that gives you the best results in the least amount of time. And just my last comment is, if there's any, if you're interested in more information on this, there's just a couple of information sources here in the slides. Or if you just want to connect with a change challenge, I'm more than happy to give you my 80-20 response to any change challenge. but it will help you get ahead in times where uncertainty is the only certainty of our circumstances. Everything seems new. And this is one way to push through it so that you not only survive change on the run, but you're successful. And I'll just close off wishing you all the best as you continue to lead change. And my last thought is just a thank you so much to Norma Jean to give me this opportunity to share you one more perspective on how to lead change. Thank you so much.
Oh, Phil, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think this has just been so valuable to everybody out there who's navigating all sorts of change, right? And how to pivot and how to make the most of your time, your energy, working, managing yourself, managing others, managing your work. Just incredible insight. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been just a real pleasure. I'm going to read our brief outro and then we will wrap up for today. This has just been, such an incredible presentation on, how we can make the most of change, because a lot of time change, like you've said, is so scary, but it can really become an opportunity. So we appreciate that. And for everybody out there, like you were saying, podcasting externally is also an incredible resource. And so we're just so happy that you joined us here today.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone. I wish you all the best.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us for Podcasting Smarter and our corporate podcasting series, Change on the Run, Surviving Workplace Uncertainty with Phil Buckley, Change Management Strategist, Leadership Coach, and author of the books Change on the Run and Change with Confidence. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Podcasting Smarter and Corporate Podcasting Smarter has live stream sessions like this one with top podcasting and business professionals. We also have exclusive recorded episodes on the Podcasting Smarter podcast. If you joined late or want to have another listen to this conversation, you can replay this live stream on Podbean's YouTube channel and our Podcasting Smarter podcast. Corporate Podcasting Smarter is brought to you by Podbean. We're a private podcast hosting solution for Fortune 100 companies with secure encrypted podcasting and a proven track record within the industry. Head over to podbean.com/enterprise to learn more about our business and enterprise solutions. And Phil, we've also got your links in the description today as well. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone.